Hey, have you ever found yourself, thinking about sex quite a bit and maybe wondering, is this normal? Is this just me?
Oh, absolutely. It's something a lot of people probably think about, but don't necessarily talk about openly.
Exactly. It feels like a really private thing. So today, on the deep dive, we're actually going to tackle that head on. We're looking into why those thoughts might pop up so often.
And we're drawing on some really interesting insights from SadhGuru for this one.
We are. And the good news, maybe right at the start, is something SadhGuru himself says. He basically says, nothing strange about it.
That's definitely reassuring, isn't it? A good place to start.
Yeah.
And his first point is, well, it's often down to our hormones. He talks about them as these powerful signals in the body.
Signals that can really influence our thinking.
Especially when we're younger. He uses this quite strong phrase, actually. He says it's almost like the hormones are temporarily hijacking our intelligence.
Wow, hijacking. That's vivid. He makes this comparison, doesn't he, about childhood?
He does. Like when you're a kid, your reproductive organs are just, well, they're just body parts. No big deal.
Right. They don't hold any special fascination.
Exactly. But then, puberty kicks in, the hormones surge, and suddenly the mental landscape changes. Those thoughts can become really prominent, almost constant.
Yeah, like they're suddenly on repeat.
Yeah,
It does make you think about how much our biology shapes our thoughts.
it really does. And Sadhguru points out that this intense hormonal drive is often strongest in our younger years.
And then it changes later on.
That's what he suggests.
Yeah.
As we get older, hormone levels naturally tend to settle down a bit. And with that, often the frequency and the sheer intensity of those thoughts can decrease.
It makes you reflect, doesn't it? Maybe you've noticed that kind of shift in your own life over time.
It's certainly food for thought.
And when those thoughts are really persistent, especially earlier on, it can feel like you're not even choosing to think them. It's almost compulsive.
Yes, that feeling of compulsion is key. Sadhguru connects this back to what he sees as the body's fundamental programs.
Which are?
Basically, two main things: survival, just staying alive, and procreation, keeping the species going. So these urges are, wired in pretty deep.
Okay, but just to be clear here, Sadhguru isn't saying it's wrong to enjoy things, is he? Like, the pleasure from fulfilling those drives.
Not at all. He's quite clear that experiencing pleasure from the body's needs and desires is perfectly natural. It's okay.
Sorry, but
There's a big but. He immediately follows up by saying that while that pleasure is fine, these experiences are ultimately, and this is his term, just limited.
Limited, meaning temporary, not the whole picture.
Exactly. Short-term, often physical. It's not the same as, say, deep fulfillment or lasting contentment.
Right, and this is where he really pushes it, I think. He says you won't find that deeper fulfillment just by chasing those limited pleasurable experiences. He uses that extreme hypothetical scenario.
Oh yeah, the one about death.
Let's say all the women in the world are after you. Or presumably all the men, depending on who you are.
Right, that one. Even if you had that extreme level of, let's say, sexual opportunity or indulgence.
His point is, even that wouldn't lead to real, lasting happiness.
Precisely. It's a stark way to illustrate that disconnect. There's pleasure, sure, but it doesn't equate to that deeper sense of, profound well-being. The pursuit itself, even if successful on its own terms, leaves something wanting.
And to make this even more concrete, he talks about George Best, the footballer.
Yeah, a really famous example. Someone who, from the outside, seemed to have incredible success with relationships, famous partners.
All the external markers in that specific area of life.
Definitely. But then Sadhguru points out the tragic contrast. How Best was apparently described later on, even when he was still relatively young, I think 35.
Yeah, as broken, miserable, frustrated.
Broken, miserable, frustrated, despite all that outward success.
And Sadhguru's key point isn't just about how he died, but the life he lived leading up to it. He calls it a terrible life. The idea being that making something limited, like pursuing those bodily desires above all else, became the absolute focus, and that ultimately led to deep unhappiness.
Exactly. It's a powerful, if sad, illustration of that core idea. Trying to make something limited into the unlimited, trying to find ultimate meaning in it. That's where the suffering comes in. It just can't deliver that.
And that constant feeling, that pull of the urges, the compulsion we mentioned, it can start to feel like you're not really free, can it? Almost like being a slave to your own body.
That's a strong feeling, being a slave.
Yeah.
And Sadhguru touches on something deep here, I think. He suggests that the human spirit inherently resists being enslaved.
whether by external forces
Or by our own internal
Yeah.
compulsions, yeah. There's this inner conflict.
And that conflict might even show up outwardly. He mentions how someone could have everything on the surface, success, possessions, but still walk around with a long face.
Yeah, like there's an underlying friction, a dissatisfaction, even if they're indulging those very urges that seem to be driving them. That resistance to being controlled.
So if that limited focus isn't bringing happiness, what happens? Do people just try harder?
That's what SadhGuru suggests can happen.
Yeah.
If life is centered on these limited things and true joy isn't found, the tendency might be to just double down. Try to accumulate more, experience more of the same, without addressing the root issue.
Which kind of brings us to his observations about culture, particularly in the West, where he feels the body has become everything.
Right. He draws a link between this intense focus on the physical, the material, the bodily, and what he describes as untold suffering.
Even when people are physically healthy and materially well off.
Yes, that's the paradox he points to. Despite advances in comfort and health, he sees this underlying current of unease, anxiety, a lack of genuine joyfulness.
He even uses the prevalence of needing medication for mental balance as a kind of indicator.
Exactly. As a sign that maybe, despite outward appearances, many people are living, as he puts it, on the verge of breaking down.
Wow. So it really circles back to that central idea, doesn't it?
It really does. For SadhGuru, the root of so much suffering seems to be elevating a limited aspect of life. The body, its desires, its pleasures, making it the be-all and end-all of the everything.
So the message isn't about denying the body or suppressing desire, is it? It's more about perspective, balance.
Precisely. It's about understanding these drives, acknowledging them, but not letting them run the entire show. Not getting trapped in compulsion, not making the body the entire focus of your existence.
It's about everything having its place.
Its proper limited role, as
Right.
he says. Everything in life has its function, its boundaries. The trouble starts when we demand something limited, like physical pleasure, to provide unlimited fulfillment. It just wasn't built for that.
And if you do try to make that limited thing your whole life,
Then, according to SadhGuru, you're essentially setting yourself up for suffering and a life that ultimately feels unfulfilled. It's about understanding the difference between fleeting pleasure and lasting well-being.
wow. Okay, that definitely gives you something to think about, doesn't it? It really boils down to perspective.
Understanding those powerful physical and hormonal drives, for sure.
But not letting them completely define you or become the sole source you look to for, that deep, real sense of fulfillment.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And maybe the question to leave you with is this. Thinking about your own life, what are the different aspects that play a role? And what might their limited roles actually be?
And what happens maybe when one of those limited things starts demanding to be the main event in your search for happiness?
Exactly. What happens when things get out of balance?
Yeah.
Something to ponder.